Hello, my name is Jenny Cook-Smith, and I'm part of the AEM Atlas team here at CASE. I'm going to spend a few minutes discussing the Alumni Engagement Metrics Survey, or AEM for short, and providing you with the background information and details you'll need to ensure you feel comfortable inputting the requested information in the survey. As you may know, in July of 2018, CASE announced an initiative to gather and provide a broad set of education related data and analytics. And the AEM project falls under this initiative called AM Atlas. The goal of AM Atlas is to be the global resource for education related advancement metrics, benchmarks, and analytics. CASE has 3,600 members from 83 different countries, and this project is really the first attempt to gather that information in one survey on this scale. We know you're putting aside time and resources to complete this survey, and we felt like it was only appropriate to speak a bit about how the results from this survey and other instruments that CASE hosts will be used. In addition to AEM, CASE securely gathers and hosts 20 different survey instruments across the globe that are both quantitative and qualitative data points. Our goal at AM Atlas is to combine those surveys with other third party and demographic data so that we may create value for you, our members. And this value comes in the form of things like webinars and trainings and other presentations, also research briefs and documentations, bespoke analysis, or facilitated cohorts to discuss the stories behind the data. All of this so that you, in turn, can use this information to shape your own institution strategies and build success. Now, let's talk about the AEM project specifically and why we're embarking on this survey at this time. For over a decade, you, our members and volunteers, have indicated a growing need to first define and then measure engagement. In response to these inquiries, CASE developed a volunteer task force, which has representatives from 4 countries and also represents the broad member base, including community colleges, independent schools, and 4-year institutions, for example. The people in that task force are chief advancement officers, as well as those in other leadership roles in advancement, alumni relations, and advancement services. This comes at a moment where some of your shops may be integrating the alumni relations and the advancement side of the house. And also, it's at a time where we're hearing a growing concern that participation may not be the appropriate de facto measurement of an institution's success in engaging the alumni base. Given that this is a global need, the task force drafted a white paper that outlined the framework and established some key definitions to become a standard no matter the type of institution or location. And the first step in this process was simply defining what it means to be engaged. We've listed the definition from the white paper here, and I'll also show you how you can access this white paper on your own. One way to think of engagement is a virtuous circle, meaning there's a virtuous circle that exists between alumni and their alma mater. The idea being that if you as the institution can build those mutually beneficial relationships, you are inspiring loyalty, but also as the university, you in turn get the benefit of those relations as well. So, with the definition established, the task force then focused on implementing a framework that would work for that broad base of 3,600 members across 80 countries. For example, when you look at the survey, you will see this project start simply with counting, not ranking or scoring. At this point, it's really hard for CASE to judge what's most important globally. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't track more detailed data or rank or at your own institutions. But we felt that broadly, this project should start simply and evolve over time as the data is collected each year. And I'll share with you our guiding principle in developing this survey. We don't have to be perfect. In fact, we believe that we're likely about 87% of the way there. And as we evolve and gather data each year, we'll continue to get closer to that target. Think of we are 87% farther down the path than anywhere we've been in the past. And you may want to remind yourself of this as you collect the data. You may not have every data point at this time, but we strive to get as much participation as possible so that we can determine what points are salient and also which pieces of data may be more difficult to track or report on. Once the alumni engagement definition has been defined, the next challenge is defining alumni, again in a way that is reflective of CASE's broad membership. The result is the 7 categories you see here. These 7 categories are mutually exclusive, meaning a single person only shows up in one bucket. We'll revisit these categories again when we get to the survey itself, and we'll discuss in more detail. So we now have our definition of engagement and key operating principles. Next, the framework as established in the white paper talks about inputs and then the 4 categories or modes of engagement. Section 1 of the survey asks for key inputs, starting with alumni. As you can see here, we've actually refined our definition to ask for the number of legally contactable alumni. For some of you, it's not legal to contact alumni who may not have opted in for certain types of communication or may have been unresponsive for a set period of time. Therefore, to create a global measure, the task force felt that this was the best group to make up the denominator. Contactable means reachable via snail mail, email, or phone. You'll also see that the inputs request some budgetary information that I'll show you momentarily in the survey itself. Next, you will see the 4 ways that alumni can be engaged: philanthropic, volunteer, experiential, and communication. We'll examine these in more detail in section 2 of the survey. So let's bring this all together. In this survey, you will see that we are asking you to provide counts or, at the very least, good faith estimates of these 4 modes across the 7 alumni categories. The outcome being that we get a count of the number of engaged alumni and at least one of the 4 modes that is then divided by the number of legally contactable alumni. So now that you have a background on this project, let's switch gears and check out the Alumni Engagement Metrics page on the CASE website, and then we'll log in to the survey. So we've put together a page specifically for this project. There are many helpful resources here that should answer most of the questions that you come across. First, you'll see we have some frequently accessed questions, and then we've added some key documentation that will be helpful for you as you complete the survey. The first link is the white paper that we discussed earlier. Next is a detailed guidance document. We highly recommend that you read carefully through this document as it's going to help you determine what information you pull from your CRM. This document can also be accessed from the survey itself, which we'll show you momentarily. It's good to set aside time to read this document in its entirety, but for now, if we go to the table of contents, you'll notice 2 sections. These will correspond to the 2 sections you'll see in the survey, and we'll refer back to this document once we're in the survey itself. And the third document is the data collection grid or the sample grid. And this mirrors what you'll see in the survey itself, too, and is meant to be a worksheet so that you can use as you gather that information. Just like the survey, you'll see two sections. The first is the alumni counts and output. And then if we click on the second tab, we can see those modes of engagement. Okay, let's go look at the survey itself. So if we go back to our alumni engagement page, if I scroll down, you'll see the link to access the survey. And then you're prompted for your username and password. If you have registered that you intend to complete the survey, you would have received a login and password. And notice that you have links to reset that or be prompted to what that is if you are unsure. And logging in, I'm going to click the survey tab. And here you can see the Alumni Engagement Metrics survey. There's a good chance that that will be the only survey listed for you, so don't be concerned if it doesn't look exactly like mine. So let's go open this up and notice that you'll see the two sections that we discussed earlier. The first step in the survey, though, is to indicate your intention of completing this survey. So if you've not already done so, you will mark your intent here. One thing to keep in mind is that when you do complete the survey, it's important to indicate that you are done with the survey. If you don't take that step, then we are unable to incorporate your results into the final tallies. So before we go click in the links and examine the inputs itself, I'd like to point out our alumni engagement metrics instructions. And if we click on that, you have the ability to access that same guidance document we saw earlier. And I suggest right-clicking and opening the link in a new tab or window so that you can easily have that document referenceable at any point. Okay, back in the surveys. Let's examine section 1, looking at alumni counts and input. So here you will see the 7 alumni categories that we introduced earlier. Now, as a reminder, you likely will not have data for all 7 types. Just fill out the area that's appropriate for your institution. So some key points for you here, and these are also noted in the guidance document. Each individual should only be counted in one category, and that's the last level they achieved. These categories include alumni who earned a credential on premise or online. Now, we recognize that these definitions are different than those currently used in other case surveys. Our goal is to ultimately consolidate these definitions so that we'll only have one set of definitions across our survey instruments. As you're filling this out, at any point, if you need additional information, you can, of course, go check out the guidance document, or you can also click on the rows or columns, which also contain pertinent definitions. So, for example, notice that for each category, we ask for 3 counts: the living alumni count, opted out, or legally contactable, which we discussed earlier. So if we click on opted out, for example, we can see that the requested input is for individuals who have either asked not to be contacted for any purpose or where the institution itself has opted out the constituent from communications. And if I click on one of our alumni categories, in this case, associates or diploma degrees, we can see some additional details here. So note that if your institution awards a diploma of higher education or a higher national diploma, that's where those alumni would be counted here. There's also, this is a space where independent schools would count individuals who completed the highest level of education available at the institution if the school does not award diplomas. So, as a reminder, we only want those unduplicated counts here. So, if you have alumni who received multiple degrees at your institution, they should only go in category 4, which is purposefully set up for those types of alumni. They would not be counted again in the other categories. As you're going through this, if you have a section that you just don't have data, enter a 0 to indicate that. At any point in the survey, should you not wish to answer a question, simply leave that question blank. So if we scroll down, the second portion of this section is where we've got some questions about staffing and alumni relations investments. Like before, you can click on any column header for specifics. And as noted in the instructions, staff costs are only for these first two columns, and the remaining three columns should not have any investments related to staffing. A small note about staffing, please count proportions appropriate for each staff member. So, for example, if you have someone who's a full time alumni relations staff person, that person should be counted as one. Alternatively, if someone works in advancement and it's a 50-50 split between alumni relations and fundraising, that individual should be allocated as point 0.5 in this calculation, regardless of whether the person actually reports to alumni relations, the central advancement office, the president or vice president, dean, foundation, career services, or association. I think you get the idea. Individuals who are not considered advancement staff but who may spend some time on advancement of relations or alumni relations, such as professors, should not be counted in this total. We also would not want to include temporary staff or volunteers such as student callers, individuals who help with mailings, or those who work at fundraising or alumni events in these totals. One final thought on that is as you're calculating staff FTE, please include partial percentages. So, an example would be if a person works 1 month out of a full 12 months in alumni relations, we count them here as 8.3% of an FTE. Now, the last three questions should be relatively straightforward for you, and it's simply to provide some additional details about your program and currency. So let's check out the second section where we ask about the modes of engagement. Like the previous section, you'll see the hyperlinks that are great options for getting quick access to any definition in question. I think this is also an area where it's a very good idea to carefully read the guidance document to ensure that you're counting correctly for each category. Additionally, you may find that you just have questions about other programs at your institution that we might not reference in our documentation. That's fine. In general, we suggest using your best judgment as to where to include them. And if you're not sure, feel free to contact AEM at case.org and we can help you to further clarify. So notice that our first four rows are going to be those modes of engagement that we introduced earlier. Let's pause a moment and talk in more detail about each of these four types or modes and the types of data to include for each. So the first is philanthropic. This is probably the most straightforward of the four modes. However, unlike some of our survey instruments, though, we are actually asking you to provide a count of all alumni who either directly made a gift in the most recent fiscal year or a gift was made on their behalf. So, for example, if my family foundation made a gift and your institution gave me a soft credit, I should be counted in this section. If I made another gift that came directly from me, you would not count me twice. So, as you can see here, the counts that we're looking for would be regardless of size, purpose, or the number of gifts during the year. We've also, and this is in the guidance document, but for your reference, listed the types of gifts that should not be included in the philanthropic count. And you can see we've listed some examples here, things like pledges, matching gifts, legacy estate gifts where the cash has been received, and also individual sponsors that are collecting on behalf of a donor, such as marathons or other similar types of events. And again, reference the guidance document because we'll go much more into detail there. The second mode looks at volunteers. So here we are looking for your formally defined volunteer roles at your institution. And again, a person should only be counted once, even if they're engaged as a volunteer in multiple roles. And we've listed some examples for you here. This is definitely an area that we expect will evolve over time. And we'll likely do things like count each type of volunteer and determine things like how important it is that perhaps they're a board member versus a classroom speaker. But again, at this stage, we're counting simply. If you have volunteer programs at your institution, but you haven't been capturing the start and the end date of when someone is a volunteer in a specific program, the best bet is just to make your best estimate for the count for the current year for our purposes. We also would suggest that you do begin tracking those start and end dates. Also, you may have staff who are also alumni volunteers, and that sometimes it can be a little unclear as to whether a specific role they're playing is in the staff or the volunteer capacity. We leave it to you to best determine how and when to count these individuals as fulfilling volunteer roles. Our next mode is experiential or think events. So here we're looking for a unique count of individuals, yet again, in each alumni category who participated in at least one of the displayed examples here in our event or experiential activities. Currently, we are not interested in the number of events that you conduct, simply the number of alumni engaged in each. Just a little more information about these. So there's a great list in the guidance document of all kinds of examples of fee-based or free events. Virtual communities, we're looking for things like career communities, affinity group communities, book groups, or similar. Do not include, though, any LinkedIn or Facebook groups that have non-specific or generic content. Um, the Alumni Association memberships. So if you answered yes, that you are have a dues paying Alumni Association membership, then this is where you should count those members. However, don't count if you automatically consider your alumni members without a payment. Another note that if you have life members, this is where they would be included. And then lastly, if the membership transaction is only a philanthropic contribution to the institution, then you'll actually count them in philanthropic instead of here. Finally, development officer visits would also fit into the definition of meaningful, substantive contact, and therefore fit in this category. Essentially, if it's meaningful enough that your development officer has filed a contact report, then count them as experiential. Make sure to check out the guidance document for even more details around this category. And, we certainly anticipate that over time, this will be more inclusive and complex. And then we move to our fourth mode of communication, which is very likely the most difficult category for you to report on. We fully recognize that your institution may not be tracking all of the activities that you see here, but we're still interested in what you are tracking. If we read the definition, we can see that specifically we're looking for interactive, meaningful, and informative communication. So, by that definition, simply opening an email isn't communication, but responding to it would be due to the interactivity. So, some examples that you probably know are tracking in your system would be things like class notes, regardless of whether they're submitted postal, mail, or digitally. If someone submitted a form with or some provision of data updates like address changes or employment information. If you get respondents to a survey, so things like a net promoter score or attitudinal or demographic surveys, someone that submitted an event evaluation form, they wrote letters to the editor, magazines, newsletters, and so forth, email responses, direct messages. This is where your social media direct messages would be, or meaningful phone contact, or they responded to the call for nominations, awards, and so forth. Now, there are other forms of communication that would meet this definition. They're likely not known to you at your institution. Of course, if they are and you're tracking this, then we certainly invite you to count this as well. And this is where you're going to see things like the likes or the comments or the retweets. And keep in mind that we're really looking for the fact that someone engaged, whether that experience is positive or negative on these forums. And again, I'll add that we suspect that this is another category that we fully see will evolve over time. So let's move back to our survey. So now that you have a good understanding of the modes, let's talk a little bit about the other columns of information that you see here. So if we examine columns E through J, you'll see that we have a place for you to indicate counts of alumni who are engaged in at least two modes, meaning that someone must be engaged in both of the modes to be counted. So, for example, if we look at column E, then we should only count individuals who were both engaged as volunteers and donors, not one or the other. Scrolling over, columns K through N are doing the same thing, except for now we're looking for the count of individuals in all three of the indicated modes. Column 4, these I think of as our super alumni. They are the individuals engaged in all four of our available modes. And then finally, column P. This is where we're asking you for a count of individuals that are engaged in any of the four modes. So this is incredibly important because this is where you'll yield the total unduplicated number of alumni engaged in one or more of the four modes. And if they just engaged once, they're still getting counted in this column. This is used to be the numerator to determine alumni engagement. So now that you have an understanding of the type of information that we're asking for in the survey, let's talk a moment about what happens once the data is complete. So once the metrics are collected, CASE will provide for you access to Data Miner, which is an online application that houses results. Access to Data Miner is available to you as part of your CASE membership. And for US based institutions, this is the same platform that you use to report on the VSE data. For those of you that are unfamiliar with Data Miner, we've listed some key benefits here. Namely, you will be able to see, of course, the data that you submitted, but also the results to any other institution who has filled out the survey. You'll also be able to search for specific schools and build your own comparison groups based on any number of criteria. You can also take advantage of a number of the preloaded comparison groups that we've put in Data Miner and use the pre-built reports that make it very easy to analyze key metrics, and you can even customize these reports to add additional variables. In the future, hopefully the near future, with the completion of additional years of engagement survey data, this application will allow you to see both trending and longitudinal reporting. As we conclude our session today, I thought we'd leave you with some of the key benefits and thoughts about the value that this important global survey provides. First and foremost, we now have an agreed upon global definition of engaged alumni. I hope you're clapping wherever you are. The work of the task force will really be used to help establish a framework of excellence that empowers advancement professionals to be bold, agile, and innovative. By developing a standard, your organization can now manage and measure your own changes over time, as well as compare those to your peer and aspirational schools. These benchmarks will also help in goal creation, in setting strategies, and making the case for investment. As we discussed over time, the creation of these metrics provides a potential provides a potential replacement for outdated measures of perceived engagement, such as alumni participation. Lastly, be on the lookout for research initiatives, benchmarks, and facilitated cohort groups so that we can really further understand these initiatives and help support educational advancement. Thank you so much for taking part in this session today. As noted, if you have any additional questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to aem@case.org. And thank you for participating in this survey.